Welcome all of you, and thank you for joining us this evening. I want to start with a story, right? A story about a pottery teacher. So he's got 20 people in his class, and he divides the class 10 on each side. They've got 10 classes set up for the next 10 weeks, and he gives them 2 different assignments. The first assignment is that group needs to make the perfect pot, and they have 10 weeks to do it. They can take as much time as they want, but their assignment is to make one perfect pot. The other group is given a very different assignment. They're supposed to use up to 50 kilograms of clay every single class for 10 classes. And their goal is to make as many pots as possible. So at the end of the 10 weeks, he comes to assess the pots and how they did. And it turns out that those who were trying to make the perfect pot, most of them never succeeded. Whereas the ones who were working with 50 kilograms every week made hundreds of pots and learned a lot along the way. And as a result, they were able to each make 3 or 4 of what they would call perfect pots. So for 1400 years, we've been given the same message about learning, about knowledge, about intellect. We've been taught that search is perpetual, it's constant, it's the key to our success, right? We've been told it should start at early childhood development, right? From the cradle, all the way till senior citizenship, all the way to the grave. But what I don't think we've done enough of is talk about how. And in my 30 years of studying and teaching and training, and now fumbling through parenting as well, growth mindset is one of the most useful ideas that I've ever come across. And so I want to share it with as many people as possible. And that's how this session was born. So before we start, let's go back to another quick poll. I'd like everyone to grab your phone. You should still be on that browser page. Each of these are sliders, so please fill out from 0 to 10 what you think your ability is on each of these subjects. We're at 30. So let's look at these results, and feel free to keep answering if you haven't finished yet. Right? If we look at this scale, if we look at math, if we look at science, if we look at music, if we look at making friends, I feel like this wasn't that difficult a question. Right? We all kind of have a sense that I'm good at math, or I'm good at public speaking, or I'm good at writing, or I'm excellent at cooking, or I make friends really easily, or I'm quite shy. And this is a little bit of a trick question, because the whole premise of this question is built around a fixed mindset. Right? I asked you if you are good at this, and when you have a point of view that says I am not good at math, that's in fact a fixed mindset. So this gives me a pretty good comfort that this is a relevant session. And to be honest, if I went through this and got this question, I would have answered it similarly. There would be some things that I would score myself very high, some very low, and most things would kind of be sitting in the middle. Our average is 5.8 across almost 40 people. So our goals today are threefold. First is to help everyone understand what a growth mindset is and how it differs from a fixed mindset. Second, we want to identify parts of our life that will benefit from implementing a growth mindset. And finally, we want to give everybody some practical steps that they can implement if they so choose. So let's get back into it. I've spent the last year looking into growth mindset, researching and trying to understand what it is. But I still don't expect you to take my word for it. Instead, what I want to do is start by presenting you some of the research on this topic that I found the most useful and the most compelling. So this term, growth mindset, actually came out of a study at Stanford University 30 years ago. A lady named Dr. Carol Dweck, who's a behavioral psychologist, she and her team were studying students' attitudes towards failure. What they were especially interested in was when students failed, some of them rebounded right away and it was no big deal, and others were devastated by even the smallest setbacks. So they took a group of 10-year-olds, all at the same math aptitude level, and they gave them a test that should be easy for all of them. So they all took the test, and they all did well because it was an easy test. Then what they did is they divided the class into 2 sections. In one section of the class, they told, wow, you guys are really smart. You really aced this test. You did fantastically. They took the other group and they said, wow, you guys really worked very hard. It shows because you did so well. And that's pretty much all they said. Then they announced to the whole group that we're going to give you another test. Now this test is a lot harder. So who's ready to take the test? Well, almost across the board, the students who had been told they were smart, for some reason, were very reluctant to take the second test. While the students on the other side that were told, hey, you worked really hard, you did really well, were all eager to take the test. Now keep in mind, this is a classroom where everyone has the same math aptitude level. They've all been taught the same. They all performed similarly on the first exam. They made everyone take the second exam. And interestingly enough, the first group underperformed significantly. So those who were told they were smart, who weren't excited to take the test, got much lower marks than the ones who were told they worked really hard and were excited to take the test. So they went forward and they said, okay, here's your results. And the last part of the experiment is they asked all of the students to sit down and write an account of what happened. This is what we did. This is how I did. And it was meant for their parents or their teachers or their grandparents. What do you think happened when you look at that?
Hold on, Azam, I got to jump in here. Even before you tell us what happened, are you saying that in this study, when students were told that they worked hard and praised for working hard, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy and they actually ended up working hard on that next test and performing better?
You know, we'll get into this a little bit more during the session, but unbelievably, that's correct. The simple fact of people being excited and expecting to do well dramatically changed the outcome. So here's what happened. And this blew me away, and it's actually the reason I ever looked at growth mindset. The summary of the article had this quote: "What's so alarming is that we took ordinary children and made them into liars simply by telling them they were smart." So when they had the students write about their results, 40% of those on the smart side lied about or inflated their scores, right? I couldn't believe it when I read this because it didn't seem possible. But this has been tested again and again, and it turns out that this mindset makes a huge difference. So what does this tell us about those kids? And what does it tell us about ourselves? The main thing it tells us is that your mindset matters. What we think impacts what we do. And I think that's pretty obvious. And what we do impacts how well we do it. So it's absolutely critical that we tackle our beliefs so that we can begin to think and act differently. So I want to begin by tackling a belief that's been incorrect for over 100 years. Brain plasticity, also known as neuroplasticity. It's a term that refers to the brain's ability to change and adapt as a result of experience. Now, until about 20 years ago, scientists believed that the brain was not malleable once you became an adult. Basically, we believed that intelligence and capability was fixed. You learned at a furious rate as a child, but once your brain kind of settled into adulthood, that was it. You had a certain range that you could continue to improve, but overall, your outcome was determined. Now, if you think about that belief and it being widely accepted across society, it had a huge impact on how we think. It changed how we teach, it changed how we live. Now, fortunately, in the last 20 years, things have changed. We've now learned that the connections in our brain can change. We know that they could decline or they could get worse, but we also know that they could get better. Overall, human brain function is probably the most complex network in the universe. And through our own thoughts, our own efforts, and our own behavior, we can make that network bigger, faster, and stronger. So how do we make our brain bigger? We make it bigger by forming new connections. If you picture a network, picture an internet network that is actually cabled rather than Wi-Fi. You make the network bigger by adding more cables and making more connections between different spots. How do you make it faster? You make it faster by adding insulation. If you've ever dealt with electricity or power, you understand that the power lines that feed our homes are very big cables and they have a lot of insulation because there's a lot of power going through them. And finally, how do you make your brain stronger? You make it stronger by thickening existing connections. So what we've found in MRIs, for people who do certain things over and over again, a guitar player, a sprinter, a piano player, a surgeon, the parts of used to do their work day in and day out, those connections actually thicken and become stronger, which make things faster. So what I've given you is a major oversimplification of neuroplasticity, but it turns out that what I've given you is enough to get us moving in the right direction. what we need to fundamentally understand is that the adult brain is not fixed. And the way we think and how we approach our lives and how we approach problems makes a big difference in that growth. So I'd now like to share with you an animated book summary of the book Growth Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. Now, there's a lot of summaries out there, and I could have just told you about the book, but I chose this particular summary because the creator does it from firsthand experience, which I think really helps suit the concepts well. I'd like you to watch this video, which is about 7 minutes long, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Marian, is the audio coming through?
Yes.
When I was young, I always felt like I was being judged. At the age of 7, I developed a severe stutter, and I feared that I might not be as smart as the other kids in my class. In school, I had one all-consuming goal: don't look stupid. In my head, I'd always be thinking, what are the chances that I'm going to stutter and look stupid in this situation? If the chances were high, then I would do anything I could to avoid that situation. It wasn't until I read the book Mindset by Carol Dweck that I really understood my constant fear of judgment. In the book Mindset, author and renowned psychologist Carol Dweck explains that the constant fear of judgment and the need to avoid looking stupid stems from a core belief people have about themselves and everyone around them. That belief is, everyone has a set amount of intelligence. From that belief, the logic goes, if I only have a fixed amount of intelligence, and if I start making mistakes and look stupid doing something, then I must not have very much intelligence. Dweck calls this underlying belief a fixed mindset. If you have a fixed mindset, you essentially believe you've been dealt a hand of cards in the poker game of life, and you're stuck with those cards. If you happen to get good grades in school, and your parents praise you for it, then you might start to believe you've been dealt a royal flush. But as you get older and face competition in school, make mistakes on tests, and encounter challenging situations, you start fearing that the hand you've been dealt really isn't that good. To maintain the illusion that you're still smart and special and talented, you avoid doing anything that you might look bad at, and you simply lose interest and stop trying. Because if you show that you don't care and you're not really trying, then people can't really judge your full ability. Author Carol Dweck has seen this pattern emerge over and over again in her research. In one study, she gave 5th graders a group of puzzles to solve. Each of the puzzles was within their current puzzle-solving ability, and all the kids loved them. But when she increased the difficulty of the puzzles, the children who had been praised for their puzzle-solving ability and developed the belief that they were gifted showed a steep decline in interest and effort as the puzzles got harder. However, Dweck found that there was another group of children who didn't shy away from the puzzles once they got harder. When Carol asked them why, they said the puzzles were an opportunity for them to get smarter. These kids took the initiative and asked Carol Dweck if she could write down the names of some of the puzzles so their mom could buy more when they got home. These kids had what Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. Growth mindset people don't believe talent and intelligence is a gift. They believe you have to work for it. A person with a growth mindset firmly believes that with the right strategy and enough effort and time, they can get better at anything. A growth mindset person believes they're always getting smarter, so they're less afraid of being labeled stupid. They know that even if they've been dealt a bad hand in the poker game of life, they can continue to draw more cards by putting in more effort and finding better strategies until they eventually have a great hand of cards. Now, this growth mindset seems inspiring. It seems cool to be able to grow our intelligence, but is it actually true? Well, 40 years ago, the answer would be no. Scientists at the time thought you could grow a little, but you were largely constrained by the default wiring of your brain. But recent science shows that they were mistaken. Based on other books I've read over the years, I've learned 3 amazing ways you can change your brain. Regardless of how old you are, you can physically grow your brain, you can speed up the circuits in your brain, and you can rewire your brain for increased performance and intelligence on specific tasks. Several years ago, before taxi drivers used GPS to get around, brain researchers took brain imaging scans of experienced London taxi drivers. Researchers noticed that the more time a London taxi driver had spent driving a taxi in London, the larger a region of the brain associated with spatial awareness and memory, the hippocampus, had become. It was apparent that the more demands the taxi drivers put on their brains, the more they had to navigate the challenging road system of London, the more neurons they were able to grow in an area of the brain that they needed to complete their job. But not all brain regions can expand in size. So, other brain regions just make circuits faster. This is done by the process of myelination. As I briefly touched on in my deep work book summary, when you focus intensely on a single subject for a period of time, you start forming white sheaths on your brain cells called myelin. This myelin acts like insulation on an electric circuit. A brain circuit with myelin can transmit information up to 10 times faster than a brain circuit without myelin. After you've added as much myelin as you can to brain cells, you can then increase the capacity of your brain by rewiring it so it activates neighboring brain regions to assist with certain tasks. You can think of this like rewiring a house, so that when you hit a switch to turn on one light, you actually turn on 2 or 3 additional lights nearby. One study showed that when a person practices guitar for hundreds of hours and uses their fingers in their left hand to play the different notes on the strings of the guitar, they light up regions of their brain associated with the left fingers, no surprise. But they also light up regions of the brain associated with the palm of the left hand. When researchers took brain scans of novice guitar players, only the fingers in the left hand were activated in the brain. It turns out that guitar players who had put in hundreds of hours of practice were able to activate more of their brain so they could play the guitar with more speed and accuracy. Now that I know that I can grow my brain's capacity, I think about challenges in a new way. Before I go into a challenge, I stop thinking, will I look smart or stupid while doing this? And start thinking, what can I learn? After a difficult challenge and a series of mistakes, I stop thinking, I'm not smart enough to do this, and start thinking, I'm not smart enough to do this yet. Now that I've changed my core belief to everyone can grow their cognitive abilities, I am less afraid of being stupid because I know I am continuously getting smarter. Even if I look stupid now, I won't look stupid very long if I apply enough effort and the right strategies. I now have the courage and confidence to go into challenging situations because those situations will allow me to upgrade my brain and learn the skills to overcome future challenges. That was the core message that I gathered from Mindset by author Carol Dweck. Reading this book will set you on the path to becoming an infinite learner. I highly recommend it. If you would like a one-page PDF summary of insights that I gathered from this book, just click the link below and I'll be happy to email it to you. If you already subscribed.
All right, so I showed you the video because I thought it was an excellent summary of many of the things we want to talk about. We also know from our teaching methodologies that seeing something and hearing something and trying something helps reinforce a point. But one important point that hasn't been made that I want to make sure we make is that growth mindset is not black and white. So what do I mean by that? There is no single person out there who is all growth mindset or all fixed mindset all of the time. We all have areas of comfort and confidence and exploration where I'm sure we're eager to learn and we're growing all the time. We also all have areas where we feel more limited or a little bit insecure. And the reality is that depending on the audience and the situation, the same type of obstacle might feel very different in different situations. If someone is around that we have a certain opinion about, or if people are watching us, or if we're not feeling well, we might have a fixed mindset one day and a growth mindset the other day. So this chart I've got on this slide does a good job explaining how this impacts our feelings and our behavior. So I'd like to walk you through it. I know it's too small here, don't worry, we'll zoom in to the top and then the bottom one at a time. So if we start at the top, once again, fixed mindset is caused by the belief that intelligence is static, and growth mindset does not believe this. So when we have a fixed mindset, because intelligence can't change, our goal is to look smart, and therefore we avoid challenges, we give up on obstacles, and we aren't motivated to try harder. Because if people see us struggling, they might think that we're not very smart. Now, in a growth mindset, we know we can get smarter, and we want to. So we embrace challenges and we keep going in the face of obstacles. And we're happy to try harder and harder until we finally succeed. Now let's look at how mindset impacts our interactions with other people. In a fixed mindset, we don't think we can improve. So criticism feels personal and often we'll get defensive because we think we're being judged. On the other side, in a growth mindset, what we're trying to do is learn. So criticism is just another form of feedback, and we're happy to hear it. And then we can decide if it's helpful or not. And finally, in a fixed mindset, where everyone is competing against each other to demonstrate who's better, we feel threatened and sometimes resentful of other people's success. But in a growth mindset, when other people succeed, it can be a source of inspiration, or better yet, a roadmap. If they got there and you have a growth mindset, you believe that you can also get there. So it helps you set goals and plan the way on how to succeed. Again, I want to make the point that none of us is one or the other. But if you're mostly fixed or mostly growth mindset, it turns out the course of your life and your capability can change dramatically. People with a fixed mindset often plateau early. They're very successful early on because of natural talent, and then they stop growing and they don't reach their true potential. Where growth-minded people actually continue to improve throughout their lives. So before we move on to the next section, I think it's probably a good time to take some questions. Shane, do we have any?
We do have a few questions in the queue. So let me start with one that comes from Sabzali. Sabzali writes, I struggle with accepting negative feedback. Does this mean I have a fixed mindset?
So I think the short answer is no. No one data point indicates that you have a fixed or a growth mindset. And there's no such thing as a fully fixed or a fully growth mindset. So I think if we're struggling with negative feedback, there could be any number of things going on. It could be something that we're sensitive about, right? If there's something that I'm feeling guilty about and someone criticizes me, let's say I hadn't put much time into this presentation and somebody said, yeah, it could have been better. I might have trouble taking that feedback because I'm already feeling bad that I didn't put in the effort. It could also be something to do with the interpersonal relationship, right? Who is giving you the feedback? The adage, don't shoot the messenger, right, is very telling. Oftentimes, and those of us who are married have probably experienced this often, that the same thing gets said by somebody else and it gets received very differently. We know how that works. So I think the simple fact that you're having trouble taking negative feedback could be that in this area, you're not as open as you could be, but it could also be the relationships and the underlying identity issues or insecurities of what's going on. So it's a start to say, let's look at this particular situation and try and understand, why do I not take this well? What am I feeling about the situation? And I think feelings are a good place to start when we react.
Azam, I'll add that you don't have to be married to have felt that experience.
Fair.
Two more questions, Azam, that are in the queue that I think are worth asking. The first one is an interesting one. So the question goes from Aman. My daddy-ma taught me that many things in our life are predetermined or meant to be according to our religion. Is this consistent with a fixed mindset?
I think I was hoping to avoid that question. So we'll just jump right into it. So predestination versus free will, right? We've been debating this as human beings for 3,000 years, give or take. So personally, I'm going to share my personal thoughts. This isn't necessarily a Tariqa perspective. But in all of the things that we've learned about God's role in the universe and how he creates and sustains everything, along with everything we're taught about the importance of intellect and the importance of accountability and the fact that we have a role to play, to me, it's a combination. I do believe that we're given ranges, and where we end up in that range is up to us. Let me use a simple example. I don't currently play tennis. So let's say I decided to take up tennis. I know it's a little bit late in life for me to take up a sport. But if I play tennis 8 hours a day, every single day for the next 3 years, chances are I'm going to be a way better tennis player, right? There's no doubt that compared to today, I'll be exceptional. But there's also no doubt in my mind that no matter how many hours I practice tennis, I'm never going to beat Serena Williams. So I think there is a certain constraint with natural talent. I think there are certain constraints and there are things that are out of our control, but I like to focus on the things that are in our control. And for growth mindset to be active in our lives, what we need to understand is no matter where we are, where we land in that range, there's always a plus or minus that can occur. And that's very much in our hands.
answer, Azam. Makes sense. We actually have a number of questions in the queue. I think we can save a lot of them for later. I'll ask one more. And I see your questions, Shanaz, Perveen, Arif, Noshaba, and we'll come to them later on. Some of them are very interesting topics. One question from the video, actually, from Farzine. She asks, is that why spaced repetition is claimed to be a great way to study for tests? And I have to admit, I had to Google exactly what spaced repetition is. I'll read it out just for all of our benefit. Spaced repetition is a method where someone is asked to remember a certain fact with the time intervals increasing each time the fact is presented.
So ironically, I'm actually in the middle of a memory development course, and one of the modules is spaced repetition. I don't know that it's necessarily related to growth mindset, but the theory behind spaced repetition is that you are in fact creating those connections. So in that way, I guess it is related to the video, that as you trigger a certain thought or a certain idea multiple times, you create another connection. Now, the difference between trying to remember a phone number 100 times in a row or reminding yourself about it first in an hour and then in a day and then in a week and then in a month is that there are different parts of your brain that are engaging. So I go back on my answer actually and say, yeah, it does sound very similar to the way that growth mindset works, in that your brain is plastic and can be changed. And one of the ways to change it is spaced repetition.
Very impressive. I can't believe you were studying that concept as the question comes up live. Well done.
Just got lucky on that one.
Let's keep going.
All right, we'll do. So this brings us to my favorite part of this topic, the power of yet. Now, this is another term coined by Dr. Carol Dweck, and it's very simple, but it's extremely powerful. Now, in our normal way of doing things, we think about accomplishments in terms of yes and no. Right? Can you play the piano? Yes. Are you good at math? No. Are you a runner? Yes. Have you achieved financial security? No. Are you ready for the future? No. Well, what happens if we take the no out of the yes and no and replace it with not yet? Now, this was alluded to in the video, but Dr. Dweck went into a high school in the US and found that students had a certain number of credits that they needed to achieve to graduate. And they replaced all of the failing grades with not yet. It was really interesting because people got their grades, and normally it would be, the students who are doing well are happy to talk about their grades, and the students who aren't doing well would be a little bit shyer and more reserved. But she observed conversations going on, like, how many not yets did you get? I got 3. How about you? I got 10. How about you? I got 20. Oh, I only have 1 left. And the whole tone of the conversation was very different, because instead of being singled out for your failure, you simply got told that, hey, there are this many progressions that you still have to go by. And what they found is when they adopted this system, over a couple of years, the graduation rates increased dramatically. And I think that's partly because people felt motivated. They didn't feel like they were stuck. It wasn't all or nothing. So let's do another quick poll. So if everyone can grab your phones and give us your best guess on this answer. How many jobs will the average person have in his or her lifetime? So the majority thinks that it's 5 to 7, which is interesting. So I'm glad I put this data up. The right answer, according to US labor data, is that by the time you're 40 years old, you'll likely have 12 to 15 jobs. It's not even in your whole lifetime, because I certainly didn't stop working at 40. I'm at 44, and I've had 7 jobs. And 2 of my jobs were almost 10 years long. So the idea that I might have 12 to 15 over the course of the same time period isn't that surprising. And the statistics actually show that if you're young and you're graduating today, the number is even higher. Now, this is US data because there's a lot of US data because Americans measure everything from how often they go to the bathroom to what color smoothie they drink. So we can always find data on Americans. But if you look at the Kenyan context, right? I've been working here for 12 years. We've hired hundreds of people in our different businesses. We've seen recruitment firms and how they handle things. And I actually think the Kenyan data might be even higher. So let's think about that for a second. If you're going to have 15 different jobs over the course of the first 40 years of your life and then continue working after that, what does that mean? Now, there's different data on jobs and careers. And we're actually told that over the course of your life, you'll have 5 to 10 careers. Now, how are careers different than jobs? Well, let's say you're an investment banker and you move from one firm to the next, to the next, to the next. Those are all different jobs, but it's the same career. But the world we live in today, I think people are likely to change careers, right? If I look at myself, I studied Islamic history. I went into consumer food marketing. I then went into consulting and technology litigation. I then went into the restaurant business and real estate, right? So these career paths are all very different. So if we think about all the turmoil we're going through, how do we prepare? Some of these choices are voluntary, but many of these choices are not ones that we have control over. So what does the world look like? Now, this slide has a lot of information, but it's basically a projection of what the future of work might look like. Now, many of these changes had already started to happen prior to COVID-19. But if you look, COVID-19 has really accelerated some of these trends. You know, for example, what questions haven't been answered? What hours will I work? Will I have a desk? How will they measure my performance? Who will measure my performance? How do I become successful in my work? What's my job description? Or what's my job description now? Should I share everything I know? Right? I'm sitting here by myself. If I don't share, well, nobody's going to share with me. Can I make a difference? I'm all on my own. I'm part of this big organization, but I'm not connected. I don't see people. I don't have a feel for things. How do we communicate? Who will control my development? Right? In large companies, it used to be that you would go through a school system, you would join a company, and that company would be responsible for making sure you learn what you need to learn. But chances are you won't be at that job or even in that career for very long. So who's responsible for your development? Today, a youngster in Kibera on a smartphone can take a course for free at MIT in Boston. Right? That's absolutely unthinkable just a few short years ago. So how do we prepare ourselves for this new reality? And I think one of the ways that we can prepare ourselves is the development of a growth mindset. Now, for me, that development begins with 3 basic things. The first is understanding that our intelligence can grow, and we've talked about that. The second, which we'll get to soon, is focusing our feedback on encouraging the right types of behavior. And finally, setting learning rather than performance goals. Because I think how we plan for success and how we perceive our advancement makes a big difference in how we perform. So let's do a quiz. We want to assess how far we've come in this presentation with our basic beliefs. So you've got 15 seconds to answer each question. All right, let's see how we did. Okay, so 26 people got the right answer. Okay, looks like everyone got this one. Okay, 33 right answers. Doing pretty well so far. Okay, almost everyone got that one.
Well, I feel like some of these are trick questions, Azam. There are actually some very interesting questions in the Q&A that relate to this one. We can come to it afterwards.
Yeah, we'll definitely come back to those. You know, the questions are not all supposed to be straightforward, but there is, okay, good. So you can tell that this one definitely wasn't straightforward. Okay, we had some dissent here as well. For us, really, the point of that was to assess kind of how far the thoughts have gone in. Obviously, if we interact with information, if we think about it, we retain it better. But this gives me a pretty good sense that I don't need to spend more time on the overarching concepts, and we can get into implementation. So now that we understand growth mindset, what can we do? So there's a story about a man, a very devout man, and he's living in a place where there are huge rainfalls and storms, and a dam is supposed to break and the river is supposed to overflow. And basically all the residents are told, get out of here, evacuate. So a friend comes over, knocks on his door and says, hey, you heard the evacuation order, we need to get out of here. I'm leaving right now, I can give you a ride, come with me. And the man says, no, I'm okay, I have faith in God, I'll be fine. So the friend drives off and says, okay. Well, the dam breaks, the streets are flooded, and another neighbor comes by and he sees a light on in the window, and he comes up in his boat because literally the roads are completely flooded. And he says, hey, I've got a boat, get in, we can get out of here. And the man says, no, I'm fine, I have my faith in God. He'll take care of me, I'll be okay. And I says, suit yourself, and he leaves. Now the house gets flooded, and the man is a little bit worried, so he climbs upstairs, he climbs out of a window, he's sitting on top of his roof, everything is water around him. And the Coast Guard comes, the Army comes with a helicopter, and they see him. And, you know, they shout down to him, grab the ladder, and he says, look, I'm fine. God will save me. I'm okay. Don't worry about it. Well, unfortunately, the man drowns. And he gets to heaven because he's led a good life. And he shows up and he's talking to God, and he says, God, I had all of this faith. I did the right thing all the time, and you let me drown. What happened? And God tells the man, look, I sent you a car, I sent you a boat, I even sent you a helicopter. It's not my fault you drowned. You have to do something for yourself. So it's clear that we need to do some things, right? And I think a good place to start is by thinking about goals. Like in this quote from the Quran, right? Allah will not change you until you change what's in yourself. So the first step has to be with us. So if we think about goals, most of us who set goals set destination goals. So what's a destination goal? I want to get to the finish line, right? I want to learn to speak French. I want to run a marathon. I want to get into a good school. I want to be successful. The problem with destination goals is that if we don't achieve them, we're left with failure. It's all or nothing. It's pretty difficult to stay motivated along a long path if the goal is the finish line, right? If you think about a marathon, if you think about getting into a good school, right? These aren't things you can decide to do tomorrow and just do them. So instead, if we can focus on a process or a learning goal, we'll have a way to make steady progress. If we don't reach some arbitrary destination, we'll still have the success and the improvement of learning. So instead of I want to speak French, I plan to add French to my daily life. Instead of I want to run a marathon, I plan to become a runner. Instead of getting into a good school, I'm going to maximize my education. Instead of being successful, I intend to improve every aspect of my life. If you think about the difference between these goals, it may sound subtle, but it's not. Because if I set the goal to improve every aspect of my life on an ongoing basis, I have something to do every single day in every single situation. And after every week or month of doing this, I'm going to have something to show for it. And that small success is motivating and it breeds further success. But if I set a goal to be successful, until I get to whatever definition of successful I've got, I have nothing to show for it. And that takes a tremendous amount of willpower and focus to maintain over a long period of time, which is quite difficult, particularly if you're trying to do it in many areas of your life.
Azam, I want to jump in here. Can I interrupt you for a moment?
Sure.
We've got a relevant question here from Adam who says, my experience in sports suggests that if I want to achieve something difficult, I need to set a fixed goal. For example, running a marathon in under 2 hours. How do you react to that?
Okay. Well, this is the only geography where that's possible, right? Nobody else in the whole world is able to run a marathon under 2 hours. And now that it's been done here, we know it can be done again. But I don't want to say that we shouldn't have destination goals, right? If there is something you're trying to achieve, it makes sense to understand that. I think the big problem with destination goals is two things. One, it tends to be all or nothing. So even though you've improved, even though you've worked hard, even though you've gotten better, until you get to that destination, all you have is failure. And that's a problem for motivation, it's a problem for self-esteem, and it's a problem for psychology. The second problem is most things that are difficult take a long time to get there. And it turns out that if you did want to run a marathon and you weren't already a runner, you would probably sign up for a club or take a course or take a training program or have a buddy, someone to walk you through the steps to say, here's how you get there, one step at a time. And what I'm advocating is that we make the goal the process. This is where I'm trying to get. What is the appropriate process to move along that? And now measure yourself as part of progress. So the same brain training course that I was talking about. The guy's name is Jim Quick, and he always says, practice makes progress. And at first you hear that and it sounds so irritating because you're used to hearing practice makes perfect. But practice doesn't make perfect. If practice made perfect, then the people who are the best at certain things in the world would stop practicing because they would have already achieved perfect. What practice does is it moves us along a continuum, and that's how we get better.
Thanks for answering that. And I think it really resonates because at the beginning of the quarantine, I set a goal to learn a new language. And let me tell you, 3 months later or 2.5 months later, I still can't speak more than 5 words of Dutch. And there's somebody else in the chat who actually had a similar question, and I think you've already answered it.
But it's a fact that pretty much anyone can solve a Rubik's Cube, as long as they're willing to put in the time. Right? There are some people who will just see it a certain way and they'll get it right away, but everyone else can also do it. The second picture, if you look down from there, is a marble maze. Now, those of you who are younger will have never even seen one of these. But if you're my age, you'll have seen these. They came in a box. There's a flat plane, and there are 2 knobs on the side of the box. And the knobs allow you to tilt the plane this way or this way. And the idea is to take that marble and follow the numbers and to get to the end. Right? And for me, I remember getting one of these, and it provided hours and hours of entertainment, not frustration. I remember doing this as a little kid, and I spent a few days because it was fun, and I believed I could. And I actually only have one memory of frustration with this, because that whole time was so pleasant and so exciting, and I felt so good when I finally got there. And then my older brother picked it up and did it in about 10 minutes, and I was crushed. But that's a different story, right? Fundamentally, my approach to this puzzle was that it was something I wanted to do. It was something I knew I could do. So that struggle was actually fun. The last image is a high ropes course. Now, other than public speaking, I think heights is the second most prevalent fear that people share across the globe, across cultures. But what's actually going on here? Now, if you haven't done a high ropes course, they're actually pretty safe. They have to be because they look so dangerous, right? So there is a cable, a steel cable that can support lots of weight that has these obstacles that you try and cross. There's a second steel cable, and that second steel cable is attached to a harness which you're wearing. So if this is done properly, there's no way you can fall. And if you think about it, what's the absolute worst that can happen? Well, if you're harnessed improperly, the worst that can happen is you inch your way across. You don't touch any of the obstacles. You simply grab the cable and you inch your way across to the other side, right? The problem is the combination of the fear of heights and the fear of exertion and the uncertainty makes people think, I can't do this. And as a result, they can't. But if you understand that the downside is simply, I'll go across a different way, all of a sudden, you can start to tackle the ones you want to tackle. There might be some that you say, you know, physically, I can't actually do that. Or from a height standpoint, this one is too scary. But you could very easily go through and start to improve and accomplish it. Now, if you've ever been to a high ropes course, usually in every group, there are a couple of people who are really not excited about doing this. And I think almost without exception, anyone I've ever gone with who was scared and then did it, it ends up being a highlight of their life because it's something so fulfilling and so enjoyable because they conquer something they didn't think they could conquer, right? In all of these situations and challenges, the determining factor of success isn't intelligence, it's not capability. It's desire and willingness to learn. If you're willing to put in the time and stick with it, you know you can make progress. And with enough progress, you can accomplish just about anything. So if we switch gears a little bit, in Nairobi in 2011, Hazar Imam was at the foundation stone ceremony for the Graduate School of Media and Communications in Nairobi. And he said, the most important thing we can learn or teach at any school in a world of perpetual change is the ability to go on learning. None of us have all the answers. Quite often, we don't even know what questions to ask. Think about this for a second. This isn't a general speech. He's launching a school of media and communications in a particular place in Nairobi. It's a specialty. And instead of talking about the specialty and talking about the program or talking about the specifics of what it will do, he's emphasizing that the ability to learn and search for the right questions is the most critical part of any education. Now, that's telling, right? He's investing in setting up a particular school and telling us that the most important thing that any school can do is teach people to learn how to learn. Now, since this talk is brought to you by ITREB, it makes sense that I take a moment now to draw some connections to our religious practice. Both set applied present faith. It's actually very simple. The application of growth mindset to our faith is no different than the application of growth mindset to any other part of our life. The principles are exactly the same. The mindset is exactly the same. The approach is exactly the same. Intellectual growth is a path. Scientific learning is a path. Any physical development, any skill, any sport, it's a path. And similarly, spiritual search is a path. If you look at our own path, the Ismaili Tariqa, the word Tariqa literally means path. It couldn't be any clearer. So if we begin to see everything in terms of a continuum where we have a choice, we get to decide how and when we want to grow and learn, then growth mindset allows us to make progress in just about anything. So if it works for just about anything, I think it's useful to look at some examples. So let's take the example of parenting. So this is a poster that helps parents understand how to implement growth mindset with their children. But if you don't have kids, or if you aren't a kid with an active parent, don't worry, I think the lessons are widely applicable. So there's a lot on here. It's hard to see. I'm going to zoom into each section by the numbers. We'll start with one because it makes sense to start with one. So first, the analogy that's most critical here is that your brain is like a muscle. If you don't use muscles, they start to die. If you use them, they strengthen. In the same way, every part of your brain can be trained. The discomfort, the uncertainty, the challenge you feel is your brain growing. If we were developing any physical muscle, we would understand and appreciate that that soreness, that tiredness is the way we get better. Our brain works the same way. Let's look at section 2. In section 2, we link mistakes to learning. Now, the key here is that we want to help each other to see these mistakes as learning opportunities. Looking at part 3, this is perhaps the most critical. It has to do with our own mindset. If we get these concepts intellectually, but we don't believe them and we don't internalize them, then it's very difficult for us to send the appropriate message with our words and our actions. Here, we really have to believe wholeheartedly in what we're thinking and what we're saying before anyone will be able to benefit from our input. Section 4 is about questions we can ask ourselves and others. What did I do today that I really had to think about? What mistakes did I make? What did I learn from them? What new strategies did I come up with? Now, section 5 focuses on our communication to others, and it's actually quite tricky. These are all about the types of praise to avoid. You're so talented. Wow, you're so smart. You did this without making any mistakes. You're really gifted. Right? We might think, what's wrong with that? These are compliments, and most of us would like to hear those things. But here's the problem. When somebody is talented or smart or gifted or didn't make any mistakes, what did they have to do with that? What part of their behavior influenced this? What was in their control? What are we encouraging somebody when we tell them that they're smart? What are we saying? Right? What can they do about that? Let's take another compliment that we often give young boys and girls. You're so beautiful, or you're so handsome. What did they have to do with that? The answer is nothing. But even worse, what are we telling the person sitting next to them? If you come up to Shane sitting next to me and say, Shane, you're so smart, and you don't say anything to me, does that mean I'm dumb? Right? If you come up to Farin and you say, Farin, you're so talented, you're so gifted, and you don't say anything to me, am I untalented? Am I ungifted? So the problem with these types of praise is that they don't leave anything in the person's control that they can influence. So instead of doing this, we want to focus on the type of feedback that's in part 6. We want to praise effort. How much effort did you put in? What type of strategy did you use? How much hard work and persistence did this take? Did you learn anything from your mistakes? How did you deal with that challenge when it came up? All of these behaviors expand our capability. They help us learn. So when we praise these types of things, we're actually encouraging the right mindset. And then we move on to part 7, which is my favorite, right? The power of yet. Now, we spoke about this earlier. It's very simple, but it's also catchy and useful. Now, my kids have heard this a lot from me, and they often throw this back in my face when I catch them doing something that they were supposed to do, right? Did you set the table? Not yet, right? And they do it to get away with it because they think it's funny. And the truth is, it is funny. But they've heard it, and they're listening. And the result is that they're thinking about possibilities. They're thinking about things remaining open. And if the cost is that they get away with slacking off and being a little bit cheeky, then that's a trade-off that I'm willing to make. Now, I know this is a lot to think about, and it isn't easy at first, but it isn't supposed to be easy. Right? If we think about this intrinsically, that important things or significant things are hard, well, that seems obvious. But our faith teaches us exactly the same thing. If you think about this saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, what is it saying? We know that God has created us as the pinnacle of all creation. We know he's given us so many blessings and so many gifts, and we know that he wants us to do well. So why on earth would he take those people who he's rooting for and give them hardships? Right? If I want something good for you, I'm going to pile it on. I'm going to give you all kinds of problems. I'm going to give you all kinds of trouble. You're really going to struggle. Why would he do that? And this brings us to probably one of my favorite Rumi quotes, right? The wound is the place where the light enters you. Right? The wound is the place where the light enters you. Without that struggle, without that hardship, without that unsettling experience, there isn't any room for illumination. Right? So I think the reason should be obvious. If we don't have room to grow, we'll be stuck in exactly the same place without any hope of progressing on our own path. So I know I've shared a lot today, and I trust that it's been informative and enlightening, but let's take a look at the practical steps of what now. Right? So what are the key things I want to leave you with today? The first step is to develop a growth mindset, not only in ourselves, but also to encourage it in those around us. This starts with our beliefs. We have to manage our own understanding, our own beliefs, beginning with neuroplasticity and understanding that it's all a continuum. And then we have to figure out, which is trickier, actually the vocabulary. What are the types of things we reward? What are the types of things we say? Second, we want to use this growth mindset on our path of life, and we want to make constant improvements. Look at everything that matters to us and say, how can we be better? How can we be faster? How can we be smarter? How can we be stronger? And when we're looking at those things and trying to decide how, right, keep in mind that if there is a destination goal that's appropriate, what is the process goal that's going to get us there? What is the learning goal that's going to get us there? And finally, I'd like us to go back to childhood and try and reframe hardships and struggles in life as interesting puzzles, opportunities to grow, and the necessary process required to make progress. A visual audience. I began today with a story about success in a pottery class and how trial and error, along with perception and thinking, is the key to success. Now, I want to end with a few words about success in life. Over the last few years, I've struggled, I've failed, I've gone through setback after setback. But what I've realized is that I have very few regrets, and that my feelings of disappointment, which definitely come, they don't last very long. And I think in coming to understand growth mindset, I'm beginning to understand why. Why don't those feelings of disappointment last very long? Why, when I make mistakes or when I have setbacks, do they not change my outlook? Why do I not lose hope? You know, I've become relentlessly focused on things that are in my control. And I've begun to learn to let go of things that are outside my control. And that's made a huge difference in my own learning path. There is so much in our control. There's so much we can impact. So for me, I don't think it makes sense to beat ourselves up over the things we can't do anything about. And the situation we're in the world right now, there are so many things out of our hands, but there are so many things that are still in our hands. So I'd like to end by sharing a final quotation. It sits on the wall in my study, right above my monitor. Actually, I can see it right now. Success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you did your best to become the best you are capable of becoming. Right? In the end, the only person that we should be competing with is the person we were yesterday. If we struggled, if we learned, if we improved in any way, no matter how small today, that's a good day. So I want to thank you all for your time this evening. It's been a real pleasure sharing this with you, and I look forward to next time.